Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're going to have a little bit of an abridged share today, I think, but we're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav, and we'll be learning today, Mirz Hashem, most of Daf Kuf Lamed Hey Amud Beis. We begin with a brand new Siman, Siman Tov Reish Samach Zayin, Sukkah V'Noya Asurin Gam Kol Shmini. The Sukkah and the Noi Sukkah are both forbidden. You're prohibited to derive any benefit or make any use out of either the sukkah or the sukkah's decorations, not only for the 7 days of Yom Tov, which we learned previously, but they're also aser on Shmini Atzeres. Now, at the beginning of the Siman here, the Mechaber is going to be speaking from the perspective of Eretz Yisrael, where Shmini Atzeres, the 8th day, is actually Yom Shmini. There's no Sveka de Yoma. We're not treating it as Suffolk Yom Shvi. But still in all, the sukkah and the noi sukkah remain aser for Shmini Atzeres. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. Sukkah v'noya, the sukkah and its decorations, asurim gam bashmini, they're not only prohibited on the 7 days of Sukkot, they're also prohibited on the day of Shmini Atzeres. Says the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Aleph, v'noya, we're talking about the sukkah v'noya and its decorations. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Hainu kishe'itra b'minei peros she'tala ba l'noi. The Mechaber is speaking over here where you took jars of flour or of oil, or you hung apples or other types of peros from the schach. That type of noi sukkah is also, you're not allowed to use it. V'em itra b'sadinin amitzuyarin. But if you hang embroidered tapestries on the walls of the sukkah, Noihagin, it is our minig, Lahiridan Labayis, to take them down and bring them into the house, Mipnech Shash Ganovim Oygishamim, because of a concern that they may become ruined because of the rain, or they might be taken by Ganovim. Now, we learned this previously in Siman Tov Reish Lamed Ches, which is the primary source for learning about the muktzah status of the Noi Sukkah. And over there, the Ramah said that the Noi of the Defanois, the decorations that are attached to the walls, the Ramah said we're makel on. The Mishnah Berurah over there says that most Paiskim don't see a difference between the Noi of the walls and the Noi of the Schach. However, we're still makel on things like embroidered tapestries that are hanging in the sukkah, because there's sort of an umdana, there's like a default position that when you hung it up in the sukkah, your das was not that it should remain there for the entire sukkah, because you knew that you're going to have to bring it in, either because of rain or because of ganovim. So there's kind of like an intrinsic tanai. Even though you didn't verbalize a tanai, we accept that really you had in your mind such a tanai that you didn't separate yourself from this type of noi sukkah, and therefore it doesn't become prohibited. Gam bashmini. Now the Mechaber said that the noi sukkah is not only aser on the 7 days of Yom Tov, but it's also aser on Yom Shmini, on Shmini Atzeres. The Mechaber did not discuss why that is the case. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, a very simple to understand reason. Let's realize the 7th day of Sukkot is a full day of Sukkot. So whatever meals you're going to eat on the 7th day of Sukkot, Hoshana Rabbah, you must eat in the sukkah. Now, what happens at the end of the day of Hoshana Rabbah when you hit the period of Ben Hashmoshes? When you hit Ben Hashmoshes of Hoshana Rabbah going into Shmini Atzeres, you're faced with the Suffolk Yom, Suffolk Laila. Is it Hoshana Rabbah or is it now Yom Shmini? Are you chayiv at sukkah? Are you not chayiv at sukkah? Well, that's a Suffolk Daraisa. Sveka Daraisa l'chumra. You have to go l'chumra. Therefore, you have to treat the Ben Hashmoshes period as still being Hoshana Rabbah, still being day 7 of Sukkot, and therefore you have a chiyuv to eat in the sukkah. So says the Mishnah Berurah here, nice cut and bays, De'ilu misrami suda bebein hashmoshes. If you would want to sit down and eat a suda during the Ben Hashmoshes period between day 7 and day 8, you would have to eat in the sukkah. So that means that the sukkah is necessary for the mitzvah for the Ben Hashmoshes period between day 7 and day 8. Now we have the golden rule, since the sukkah and the noy sukkah are muktzah during the ben hashmashos period at the beginning of day 8, and because it's huktzah l'mitzvasai, it's still there needed for the mitzvah. So now it's katzoi l'kula yuma. That muktzah status carries over from the ben hashmashos period throughout the entire day 8, and thus even in Eretz Yisrael, where day 8 is certainly Shmini Atzeres, it's certainly not Sukkos, still the Sukkah and the Noy Sukkah are prohibited for the entire day of Shmini Atzeres. And now, says the Chavetz Chaim, how does this apply to us in Chutz La'aretz? Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'hu adin b'Chutz La'aretz, and now the same halacha would apply in Chutz La'aretz, aser batshi, my high timer. For the same reason, the sukkah and the noy sukkah will be muktzah for Simchas Torah in Chutz La'aretz, because in Chutz La'aretz, Yom Shmini, Shmini Atzeres, is Safik Shvi, Safik Shmini. That's the way we treat it because of Sveikat Yoma. Even though Anan Bekiin Bekviya Deyarcha, we know that the 8th day is the real day of Shmini Atzeres, and Simchas Torah is not. But still, Minig Aviseinu B'Yadeinu, we operate with the theory of Sveikat Yoma, and therefore we treat Yom Shmini as being Safik Shvi, Safik Shmini, right? So, therefore, if we would want to eat a Suda during the Ben Hashmashos period, going from Shmini Atzeres into Simchas Torah, we would look at it the same way that in Eretz Yisrael, you look at the Ben Hashmashos period between day 7 and day 8. In Eretz Yisrael, you look at that Ben Hashmashos period between day 7 and day 8, and you say, well, it's a suffix, maybe it's day 7, and therefore I still have a chiyuv to eat in the sukkah. And therefore, the sukkah and the noy sukkah become muktzah for the Ben Hashmashos period between day 7 and day 8, and that muktzah status remains for the entire day 8. That's in Eretz Yisrael. Well, in Chutz La'aretz, we look at day 8, and we say, well, there's a suffix. Maybe day 8 is really day 7. If day 8 is really day 7, then we would make the same cheshbon, the Ben Hashmashos period between Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, right? We're going to look at it and say, well, maybe it's not really Shmini Atzeres. Maybe it's really Yom Shvi. And maybe tomorrow is really Yom Shmini. So, if we have a suffix, if we have a Suda that comes up during the Ben Hashmashos period, we're going to eat in the Sukkah. So again, Migu des Katzoi LeBen Hashmashos is Katzoi LeKula Yuma, and the Sukkah and the Noy Sukkah remain Aser for Simchas Torah. Now, there is a kasha on this, and the kasha is a very simple kasha. I told you earlier that when it's in Eretz Yisrael, and it's Ben Hashmashos between day 7 and day 8, so the reason you have to eat in the sukkah during Ben Hashmashos is because it's a suffix daraisa. Sveka daraisa l'chumra. If today is day 7, then I have a chiyuv daraisa to eat in the sukkah. But now let's transplant that to Chutz La'aretz. And let's talk about Ben Hashmashos going from Shmini Atzeres to Simchas Torah. So now it's Ben Hashmashos, I have a suffix. But what kind of suffix is it? The chiyuv to eat in the sukkah at Shmini Atzeres is a chiyuv d'Rabbanan. It's not a chiyuv daraisa. So really, it would seem that we only have a Sveika D'Rabbanan, and a Sveika D'Rabbanan l'chayr we would go l'kula. So why would we eat in the sukkah during that Ben Hashmashos? And if we're not going to eat in the sukkah during that Ben Hashmashos, then we wouldn't say Migidis Katzoi LeBen Hashmashos is Katzoi l'kula Yuma. It shouldn't be as Katzoi LeBen Hashmashos. So the Pri Megadim asks this kasha, and the Pri Megadim's teretz is that you're right. In essence, it's a Sveika D'Rabbanan. But we treat Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golius in all respects exactly the same way we treat the first day of Yom Tov. And therefore, if the halacha is that on the first day of Yom Tov, on Shmini Atzeres, the sukkah and the noy sukkah are osir, then on Yom Chi, on Simchas Torah, again, they're osir. Even though now we're only dealing with a Sveika D'Rabbanan, not a Sveika D'Oraisa, we don't make a discrepancy between Simchas Torah, which is Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golius, and Shmini Atzeres, which is the first day of Yom Tov. Okay. So we did the Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Aleph, and Ois Cotton Beis. Now let's go back to the Mechaber. So the Mechaber said, Sukkah v'noya asura gam b'shmini b'chutz la'aretz oisim shtei yom tovim asur gam b'tshi. So, like we just explained this in the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber says that in Chutz La'aretz, where you have Simchas Torah, the sukkah and the noisuk are also asur on Simchas Torah, shuhu safik shmini. Now, these words of the Mechaber, shuhu safik shmini, are a little puzzling to me, because again, the reason why the sukkah and the noisuk are asur on Simchas Torah is because you would eat in the sukkah during Ben Hashmashos of Shmini Atzeres night going into Simchas Torah day. That really doesn't have anything to do with the fact that it's Safek Shmini. But be that as it may. Continues the Mechaber. V'mchal Shabbos b'moitza Yom Tov ha'achrid shel Chag. Let's say Simchas Torah is Friday and Isru Chag is Shabbos. V'mchal Shabbos b'moitza Yom Tov ha'achrid shel Chag. Naihagim shaloi lehistapik minoi sukkah ad motzoi Shabbos. There's a minig not to use any of the noisukah, so don't cut down an apple and take a bite out of the apple until Motzei Shabbos. The Yesh Batirim, however, the Mechaber says there are those that are matir this, and this really, as we're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah, is something that we discussed already last week. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Cotton Gimel. Ad Motzei Shabbos. There are some that say, again, what's the case over here? Shmini Atzeres. Simchas Torah was Friday. Now we said that the sukkah and the noisukah are aser even on Simchas Torah. But now Yom Tov is totally over. Now it's Shabbos. Could you use the noisukah now on Shabbos? Says the Mechaber, there are those that say that you cannot. Why? Explains the Mishnah Berurah, the kevid to be Yom Tov aser, because the bottom line is that on Yom Tov, on Simchas Torah, the noisukah was aser. Im yistapik b'Shabbos, now you want to use it on Isra Chag, on Shabbos, the next day after Simchas Torah, so on Simchas Torah it was Aser, and on Shabbos you want it to be Mutter. Mikri Hachana. That shmeks of Hachana. That looks like Hachana. We have something that was not available for use yesterday. This apple was Aser yesterday because it was Noisukah. Now it's available today. It looks like Yom Tov was Meichin for Shabbos. And we have a Chana D'Rabba. Yom Tov is not allowed to be Meichin for Shabbos. The Efsher, the Loi Ba Lahidiyah, says to Chavetz Chaim, it could be that the Mechaber is only telling us, Ela shenagu kach, v'loi midina. The words of the Mechaber were very meduyik. The Mechaber said, Naihagim, there is a minig. Says the Chavetz Chaim, yeah, it's a minig, but it's not meikar adin. Shagaba Taisis tamu ala minig. Even Taisis reacts in wonderment to this minig. And in Siman Tafrei Samachei we discussed this. Sasam kadbadeya harishayna lahakel kayesh batirin dekan. We already mentioned this machlokes over there when we were speaking about the esrik, and we said what kind of hachana is there? There was no ma'isa done over here. There's no hachana. It's just a passage of time. Ice cotton dalid. V'yesh batirin, and indeed, the Mechaber said there are those that are matir, and they say there's no achana here. The me'eza tam nesar. Why should we say that the noisuk is aser? If somehow you want to turn around and you want to say that the same halacha that applied on Yom Tov applies on Shabbos, in other words, if it was aser ben hashmashos going from Shmini Atzeres into Simchas Torah, so not only do we say migud is katzoyle ben hashmashos is katzoyle kula yuma, but that muktzah status should continue even into Isra Chag, even into Shabbos. Hakara lo dishtei kedusha saying we don't paskin that way. We learned earlier in Hilchas Yom Tov that it's shtei kedushos. The Kedusha of Yom Tov is one Kedusha, the Kedusha of Shabbos is a new Kedusha. The Muktzah status of Yom Tov doesn't carry over to Isra Chag or Shabbos. And if you want to make an argument that it should be also because of Hachana, Ma'achana Yeshkan. There was no Hachana done over here. Now we go to the Ramah. Says the Ramah, Haga, Yesh Shenagu, there are those that have the minig, Kishayu Yoitzim and Asukah, when they leave the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, what we call bazegen zich the sukkah, and we eat something in the sukkah, and we say this yihiratzon, and there's a very nice tefillah that goes along with it. So the Rambam brings down that minig. And now the Ramah says, for Asar lahachin b'yomtiv l'tzarech leil yomtiv, we have to remember that on Shmini Atzeres, we're not allowed to do hachana for Simchas Torah. You're not allowed to do any preparation on Shmini Atzeres for Simchas Torah night. V'chein, and similarly, Asar lahamin al shulchanais v'asafsalim b'abayis l'tzarech halayla. We're not allowed to set up the table and the chairs in the house. We want to bring the tables and the chairs in from the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres when we finish using the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres and set them up for Simchas Torah. You're not allowed to do that. That would be hachana from one day of Yom Tov to the next, from Shmini Atzeres to Simchas Torah. To have hachana, that's also because of hachana. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in hay. L'tzarech leil Yom Tov shel Simchas Torah. You're not allowed to do hachana on Shmini Atzeres for Simchas Torah by night. Why? The Safek Chayilhu. Because we have to remember that there's the potential that Simchas Torah is not really a day of Kedusha. It's really a day of Chayil. So now if you would do Hachana on Shmini Atzeres, which is the first day of Yom Tov, for Simchas Torah, which is the second day of Yom Tov, you're being Mechin from a day of Yom Tov for a day of Chayil. And as far as the details of this halacha, Ayla El b'Siman Tov Kuf Gimel, in Hilchos Yom Tov Siman Tov Kuf Gimel. Even a lower level of hachana, you just want to go get wine, and we're not talking about Isser Malacha, of Isser Haitzah, or anything else. You want to go to your neighbor, get a bottle of wine on Shmini Atzeres afternoon for the Simchas Torah night meal. You can't do that. It's hachana. But if it's a very pressing situation, you know at night you're not going to be able to get wine. If it's something that's very much not a tercha, there's no malacha, there's really no tercha involved, just a question of going and getting a bottle of wine, shasat chak, you're not going to be able to get wine tonight, then the Chavetz Chaim says you could do it, rak shetzarach la'aviyai ba'oid yom gadol, but you have to do it early in the day on Shmini Atzeres, so that it's not clear that it's hachana for tonight. Maybe you're getting it now at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because you want to drink some wine, Shmini Atzeres in the afternoon. And you shouldn't carry it in the normal way. Rak yeshana, you should make some kind of shinoi. But don't bring a raya from this to think that you can make hachana from a day of Yom Tov for a weekday. You shouldn't make the beds in the house on Yom Tov for Isser Chag. You should not be goylel the Sefer Torah. Let's say it's a 3-day Yom Tov. So today is Shabbos, tomorrow is Yom Tov. You want to be goylel the Sefer Torah today for tomorrow's Kriya? You should not do that. Also, b'Shabbos you wear Yom Tov v'chem Yom Tov l'chaverim. You're not allowed to set up the tables. You're not allowed to set the tables up. What that meant in the Chavetz Chaim's time was they had a table where the tabletop was separate from the legs. So when you went to bring in the table and the chair from the sukkah, what you were doing was you were bringing in the base, and then you were putting the tabletop on top of the base. Chavetz Chaim says that the Achrayim say you can't set the table up. To place the tabletop on top of the frame, that's usher. But to just bring in the table into the house, that you're allowed to do. And certainly if you need the table in the house during the day, certainly if you have some kind of a need to have the table in the house during the day. And it's very interesting, the second example that the Chavetz Chaim gives here. He says sometimes you want to bring the table into the house and you want to set it up just so that your house shouldn't look like a churva. An empty house looks like a churva. It looks like a ruin. It doesn't have furniture. It's not set up. That's a valid reason to allow you to do what's essentially a very low level of hachana. We're talking about Shmini Atzeres afternoon going into Simchas Torah. So if you want to bring the table in and just bring it in so that the house shouldn't look empty, that's valid. And based on this, we also have a heter to clean up the table, according to some poskim, after Shalosh Shudas. People say after Shalosh Shudas you can't clear the table off. It's achana. You're not using the table anymore on Shabbos, so it's achana for Motzei Shabbos. Not really. You're not mechuyev to live with your dining room being filthy. So if there's still some time left for Shabbos and you want the place to look menschlich, you're allowed to clear the table off so that the house should look menschlich. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. Discuss of Liman HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Berurah should send Yeshua's Refuas, Parnasa, Shidduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the BS Tzedek, B'meher v'yameinu, Amen. Be well.